Hello, friends. Welcome to another edition of No Cap Room. My name is Jake Fischer. I am the senior NBA reporter at Yahoo Sports, and I'm joined as always by my man, your man, everyone's man, senior NBA writer at Yahoo Sports, Dan Devine. What is up?
We are moving through our playoffs journey, Jake. A couple of teams we've already said goodbye to, and we'll deal with them at different points. But right now, man, we got to deal with the wreckage of a wild Wednesday night in the NBA playoffs.
Wild indeed. It had like a March Madness feel. 4 games, 2 games going at once. I had the 2 screens. It was, you got your coffee. I don't drink coffee. I need coffee today. I should have drank some coffee. But there's a lot. There's a lot going on. We should just jump right into it. We've got no silly takes on the couch today. We have, because we were just too enwrapped in Heat Bucks in my apartment.
Man.
Where my lady sat down. I called her in because she only likes the last 2 minutes. It's a fun, silly bit. But she sits down and she goes, "Is Strus loose?" Because she's a Heat fan. She knows. Strus was not really loose.
Is it particularly about the Dos Minutos thing? Like is that like the clarion call? Like, okay, now it's time to start paying attention.
I think it's more about like she just doesn't care until the drama.
I don't have time for the first 46. Well, evidently the Bucks only play 46 minutes too.
True. And then she sat down and she was like, "This is stressful." I was like, yeah, there's a lot of multi-billion-dollar organizational fates on the line here, which is a great way to kind of set the stage because, these are 2 teams that certainly entered the season with championship aspirations. Neither of them wanted to go home in the first round, and one of them did. And not the one people were expecting. Of course, the Bucks only the 6th team in NBA history to lose as a number 1 overall seed in their conference. But also the Heat, first team. We could see the Lakers do it very soon, but the Heat are the first team to emerge out of the play-in tournament and win a series. But also like injuries and whatever, like the Heat were not your typical 8 seed. We've talked about that. We talked about Jimmy Butler being Jimmy Buckets and all the above. But just, I don't know, before we get into like the granular details, just from no cap room vibes, emotional, let's just be 2 friends talking standpoint, like it is just, it's a nuts thing that occurred. Like to watch Milwaukee fumble away 2 straight games that they were clearly in pole position from. Like, how are you just coming down from that crazy experience that we all shared on our televisions?
I couldn't believe how believable it felt. Maybe that's the way to frame it, because I'm watching this all unravel in real time. The Bucks had a 16-point lead heading into the fourth quarter. They were still up 8 with, I believe, 3 minutes to go, a little over 3 minutes to go. And they just completely stopped running any semblance of offense, which is what happened in game 4 as well. And you're watching it and you're saying, obviously, Mike Budenholzer is a smarter person than I am. I'm not claiming that I should be the head coach of an NBA basketball team, but you're like, why are there not timeouts now? Why are you not even trying Giannis on Jimmy? Or why are you not even trying like doubling on Jimmy? Why are you not trying to trap the ball out of his hands or face guard him 30 feet away from the whatever? And I understand like broadly the argument that Drew Holiday is maybe the best perimeter defender in the NBA. He is a guy that you trust implicitly. He is a champion. He has won you a championship. We're going to trust him. And the thing we do better than anybody else. And it won us a ton of games and it won us a title, and we're not going to deviate. But Jimmy Butler had scored, 98 points in the previous 2 games against you or something like that. If ever there was a time to shake things up, that seemed like it was it. And they just didn't. And it made you wonder, like, is Mike Budenholzer watching a different game? Do the Bucks not realize that at the end of this one, it's done? I felt like I was taking crazy pills watching it. Like that there was maybe I was wrong about the state of the series. Like maybe it's 2-1. It blew my mind. But the fact that a Miami team that Miami had zero fear of that Bucks team and zero concern about we're down 20, we're down 16, does not matter. We will be back into this game was unsurprising given the way that Heat team is built and what they've done. And that the Bucks just it looked like everybody on the team wanted to throw the ball into the stands, and most of them tried. Was also unsurprising, even given that
Giannis quite literally tried to throw it to the broadcast booth at center court. Like there was, I mean, it was a direct shot. Like it was so disorienting. Like shout out to the Turner Network guy in some like trailer somewhere in the bowels of that arena who was like, immediately switch it to the camera where it's coming at us right now. And then Middleton's like knocking over all the monitors. I thought I was like in a movie where the camera all of a sudden shifted and you realize like the protagonist was a lie all along. Like I was losing my mind too in that final stretch.
I mean, listen, if what your takeaway is from that game is that the Bucks were a lie all along, I can't argue with you. And it's hard to it's not hard to blame Giannis. We can put plenty of blame on Giannis, but it's hard to it's not hard to understand why he wanted to get rid of the ball, considering he had missed 13 free throws to that point. Like all of the things that were bugaboos for the Heat for the Bucks rather, that were things that they had struggled with and that were fatal flaws of theirs that we all thought were vanquished when they won the championship. It was like all of them came back at once. And all of a sudden they were back in the bubble 2.5 years ago. They were just trapped and they could not get out. And it was like, using movie references, it was like in Watchmen where Rorschach says, like, I'm not locked in here with all of you. You're locked in here with all of me. Yeah. Except Rorschach is Jimmy Butler. And I imagine he has a Rorschach mask somewhere in his home.
Jimmy Butler is the one who knocks, to pull a Breaking Bad reference. No, I mean, look, the thing you started talking about, which I think a lot of the internet has been talking about and a lot of people in the coaching world and the intel dabblers have been talking about ever since Milwaukee lost game 1. What will this mean for the future of Mike Budenholzer? I think it's a very fair question to at least ask, being that, I mean, I think the whole NBA world pretty much knows and has kind of written it in stone that if Kevin Durant's toe was behind the line in 2021 and the Nets defeated Milwaukee, that his job was hanging in the balance and he was all, the likely to have been terminated then. It's too early right now. We're recording this on Thursday at 12:30. I mean, just happened last night. Feelings are raw. I think any stable organization and front office, which the Bucks certainly seem to be, aside from the failures between 0 and 48 on the clock here, like from all my accounting, no one looks at the Bucks as one of these situations that's got all this palace intrigue and who's calling the shots and blah, blah, blah. So like, there's going to be a cooling down period, I believe, before there's some, guillotine dropping. But I can guarantee you meetings are going to be held. And I can guarantee you that there's absolutely going to be conversations about whether there are better options than Mike Budenholzer to coach this team moving forward. That could be Charles Lee, the assistant on the front of the bench, who is very much a leading candidate for the Detroit Pistons job. It could be an outside person. I don't know what the answer is going to be because they don't know what the answer is going to be yet. I think that's an important thing that I try to remind fans all the time when we're reporting intelli things, that like when the job is to kind of lay out the landscape of what these decision makers will ultimately have to decide within, doesn't mean that we can come up with their decision before they can. But it's clearly something they're going to evaluate. And with that Charles Lee to Detroit potential component, it's going to potentially have ripple effects across the coaching market around the NBA. There aren't a ton of openings right now. It's really just Detroit and Toronto, but that's because of that. Like if Milwaukee suddenly enters the ring in a very attractive situation as it presently stands with the roster, obviously they just lost. We're having this whole post-mortem about it, but like you can't tell me that the Bucks are a more intriguing coaching opportunity than the Raptors or the Pistons right now. So there's just a lot that could unfold from there. Seems like you're kind of on board with if that were to be the ultimate decision to change things there. But it's also interesting in that like I had not heard, even though there was all this noise from people both in Milwaukee and people around the situation who have knowledge, let's say, there was definitely like some pushback on all the whispers going into last night's game. That being said, last night's game, I think everyone in Milwaukee was kind of expecting, all right, well, we're just going to blow the doors off this team. or win by 30. We'll go back to Miami. We're playing Game 7. Like, they were already kind of. Even Giannis basically said it last night. I don't know the exact quote, so don't take this as verbatim. But he basically said we looked too far ahead and we're trying to win a championship instead of the beast that was in front of us.
Yeah, the quote was, and Giannis was plenty quotable last night, and we'll get to that in a second. But what he said was, we were trying to win a championship. They were trying to beat us. And that is the difference that I think gets to the heart of the Mike Budenholzer question. There's no doubt that what Mike Budenholzer brought when he got to Milwaukee from Atlanta was a systemization of the way the Bucks played, a sense of how we can unlock Giannis Antetokounmpo's specific greatness on both ends of the floor and maximize his abilities, and put a system in place to do that, which, coming off of the Jason Kidd era, was, manna from heaven for them. It was a sense that, like, there's a guy understands how to put something in place around our special, unique player to vault us into a new level. And that happened. They've been consistently up at the top of the league in win total. They won a championship. They've made deep playoff runs. But there comes a point, and has come a point in virtually every postseason that he's coached, even going back to Atlanta, where once the opposition adjusts to the style and says, we understand how to attack, and it started in this series with Miami right from the jump being able to beat the drop coverage with Brook Lopez and get it to mid-range jumpers. And it continued throughout. They're not going to move Drew off of Jimmy. Jimmy is going to be able to physically dominate that matchup. He can go up over the top of Drew in a way that a lot of guys can't. They're not going to switch off of it. We're going to keep hitting it. They're going to keep giving us the switch with Chris Middleton onto Jimmy Butler. He's going to punish that. When they wind up bringing more help to the paint, or when Brook Lopez winds up coming out to block shots, we can hammer the offensive glass. We can get to pull up threes. All of the things that you can do against a Bucks defense, the way they play all season long, the Heat did all of it, and Mike Budenholzer didn't change anything. He just kind of kept doing what he was doing. And on one level, you understand that. We've been one of the most successful teams in the NBA since I got here, doing what we do better than anybody. But there comes a point, and there has come a point in virtually every postseason, where somebody says, we have an answer for that, and then he has not responded to it. The consecutive losses that they've had, Toronto, you can chalk that up if you want to saying Kawhi just straight up outplayed Giannis, and Giannis wasn't really ready for it. I get that. But there's the Heat in the bubble. There's this series. There was, if not for maybe Trae Young spraining his ankle against the Hawks a couple of years ago, maybe that Eastern Conference Finals goes differently. There always is a point where you're like, well, why aren't they changing things? And so I understand your point about there's going to be a cooling off period. There's going to be a moment for reflection. Before Game 5, nobody was ready to, pull Mike Budenholzer's card, but to blow a 16-point fourth quarter lead, and the way they did it, having timeouts in your back pocket in 2 straight games where you were the favorite, and to not even get a shot off at the end of overtime, and to just go into the offseason with that kind of fizzle, I think has to change what some of those whispers sound like, and maybe the volume of them. I wouldn't advocate for him getting fired from a lot of positions, but I think in this set of circumstances, they have to look seriously at it, because now you're at a point where you're deep in Giannis's prime. The way the team is constructed is going to make it really hard to make significant changes that you would want to, at least. Maybe some are going to happen that you don't want to have happen. And so then it's about who's leading the charge. And I think that's something they have to look very strongly at.
Yeah, I think it's also important to share with our listeners that I have come to learn and appreciate the last couple of seasons, particularly. We obviously don't know what the game plan was. We don't know what certain players didn't execute. We don't know what exact shortcomings necessarily should be pinned on Bud versus a lack of execution here, a lack of execution there. But at the end of the day, there is one obvious thing that I saw that is a direct kind of like contrast to what at least the front office had in mind. And that is this. They spent 4, 5, 6 months chasing Jay Crowder, and Jay Crowder just disappeared from that series. That's one thing. I'm not saying I know after last night's game this is something that John Horst is going to be shaking his fist at Mike Budenholzer about. But when 5 second round picks isn't 5 first-round picks that Cleveland gave up for Donovan Mitchell that we'll talk about in a little bit here. But they gave up pretty much the Bucks had 2 rabbits in their hat to pull at the deadline. They could have used this 2029 first-round pick they still have access to, or basically this 5 second-round pick package and all these contracts that one of them was Serge Ibaka, who they basically mortgaged all their wing depth to go get last year, to go get Jay Crowder, who was supposed to be this. And I'm not saying Jay Crowder was the obvious answer. If they played him, he would have things would have been different. But to really pursue that particular position, because they were looking at other options too. They looked at Eric Gordon, they looked at Bogdanovich. They were looking for just more wing help, and they got this guy, and they didn't use him at all. And he also played on that team in the finals not that long ago. Intimately knows that team. It's just, that's one thing that I'm sure will get at least addressed in whatever, housekeeping and evaluation and reflection they're going to do in-house there. Outside of that, I mean, there's a ton that's going to be left to be determined with Chris Middleton's player option, and Brook Lopez is also someone who is up as a free agent. And look, it's so early. It's April 27th. We haven't even gotten to the combine yet, which is when all these agents flock to Chicago, and there's a lot of clandestine meetings that happen where, if you want to know when the free agent conversations begin, they have already begun. I've already heard numbers for certain players. I'll tell you that. But they really do kind of start in earnest in Chicago, and I can guarantee you right now, Chris Middleton is going to be a name that other teams are looking at, and now this just gives more credence for that potential door to be opened for his exit. If he, I mean, I don't want to speak for Chris. It's so early. It's so early, but this is all to say there's going to be a lot of potential blocks pulled from this Jenga tower that is already wobbling on its own.
I want to use Middleton as a way to move off to the kind of the biggest thing to come out of last night. The fact that Chris Middleton, after, missing 50 games or almost 50 games to injuries this season, persistent knee problems, was only sort of intermittently his old self, was food on defense pretty much whenever Miami went after him. The fact that he was the only guy you could trust, even kind of, with the ball in his hands late in that game, because Giannis was going to miss 3 free throws and didn't want to hold on to the ball. Giannis couldn't make a jumper. Drew Holiday was misfiring and sort of erratic. There wasn't anybody else you could consistently trust to make a shot or create a play off the dribble. Middleton had to be that guy. And that, I think, brings me back to the question that Eric Nem of The Athletic asked to Giannis in the post-game press conference of whether he viewed this season as a failure. And Giannis, if you're listening to this, I want to point you to Dan Wetzel, our colleague Dan Wetzel, has a column up on Yahoo Sports that's a good read.
You want to point Giannis to read Dan Wetzel's column?
Oh,
is that what you're saying?
No. I mean, listen, I think Giannis should support Yahoo Sports in all of our endeavors, but the broader listenership. But if Giannis is part of that, I won't argue with it.
I just wanted to be clear.
So Eric asked Giannis after and Eric has sat down with Giannis one-on-one and built a relationship with him over many years and has asked him some pretty heavy questions, and they've had pretty heavy conversations. And he asked him, at this point, do you view this season as a failure? And Giannis got very emotional, and everybody's seen the clip by now, and you sort of understand that. And his response was, and here's from the quote, "It's not a failure. It's steps to success. There's always steps to it. Michael Jordan played 15 years, won 6 championships. The other 9 years were a failure? That's what you're telling me? It's the wrong question. There's no failure in sports. There's good days, bad days. Some days you're successful, some days you're not. Some days it's your turn, some days it's not. That's what sports is about. You don't always win. Sometimes other people win. And this year somebody else is going to win. Simple as that." And I think there's multiple things to take away from that. I think it's probably a healthy perspective overall in just terms of like not reducing success in your life to a binary. But with all due respect, we are talking about a business where one team wins the championship and one team doesn't. And when one team wins, another team loses. There is a zero-sum component to this part of the experience. And so I can understand, no one's saying that Giannis Antetokounmpo has to feel like a failure himself, but You are a 58-win team that was the number 1 overall seed in the entire postseason with a player that everybody, or many, many people, had as an MVP finalist. Many thought he should be the MVP of the league. An all-defensive player, a defensive player of the year finalist in Brook Lopez, another all-defensive team player in Drew Holiday. Chris Middleton back as healthy as he's going to be. This was a team that was the favorite to win the championship, and they are not only out in the first round, they are out in 5 games. If you do not view that as a failure, if we do not consider that to be a failure in the context of competitive sports, I'm not entirely sure what we are doing as people who look at professional sports. Doesn't mean that Giannis has to see himself as a failure, but I struggle to imagine a scenario in which a team could blow multiple fourth quarter leads in a series where they lose in 5 games to a underdog in the first round of the playoffs and have that be anything but a failure. Yeah. I feel like I'm missing something.
I like the idea, if this is what Giannis is kind of alluding to, I like the idea of generally shifting our discourse in a direction away from championship or bust. I understand that.
Yes, 1,000%.
I understand that. At the end of the day, though, yeah, you're correct, I believe, Dan Devine, that when context is everything is relative. Sure, the Bucks, if they didn't win the title this year, is it life or death? No. But there's potentially a head coach that we just spent 10 minutes talking about losing his job because of this. There's potentially, veteran players that won championships here exiting out the door because of this. When there are repercussions to not achieving a goal, I wouldn't necessarily say that definitively means it's a failure, but that definitely doesn't mean that it's not something that has negative ripple effects to come from it. And I mean, it is like, I think the reason why my friends, the Malamet brothers, formerly of Bleacher Report, why Game of Zones was so effective is because, like, when you close your eyes and you take away the jerseys and you take away the orange ball and you really think about, these kingdoms from different cities and their palaces that are built, with billions of dollars, and the village comes and screams for blood, like, that's what it is. That's what it's competition. There's a winner and a loser. And I think, like, there are definitely different levels of success that I understand Giannis is referring to. But I'm also like a worshiper of Giannis's philosophy. Like, I am an acolyte of all of his perspective and everything he's shared with the public since he's kind of taken a mantle of being like, I am one of the best players in the league. I have achieved probably like the greatest level of success that anyone could achieve in their field. Like, I have wisdom to impart upon the public now. Like, I get where he's coming from in that things shouldn't just necessarily be looked at like, did you do it or did you not? There's things to be gained in the process and what have you. But yeah, in this stage, I mean, look, the Cleveland Cavaliers don't have as much. I didn't have as much at stake this year as Milwaukee did. Like, this was supposed to be their first trip into the postseason and like learn some things and build on it. But like, they sent out 5 years of draft capital for Donovan Mitchell. They quote unquote stole him from New York in doing so, and like, they got blasted by the Knicks in 5 games as well. And like, Cleveland now has to go and have these same type of retrospective conversations and think about it and think about, I mean, I don't believe that they're going to split Jared Allen and Evan Mobley. I don't, but like, everyone in the NBA is certainly wondering if that's a thing that could happen this summer. Like, the playoffs are ultimately what sets the stage for your decision-making in the summer to go and win it again next year. Like, as much as people, I think, get distracted by the idea that, the transaction stuff and whatever, like, it's not about the basketball. Like, it's kind of a chicken and an egg type thing. Like, the regular season is where you workshop some things and, you have the trade deadline to fine tune it and, add in some new ingredients and hope your recipe is ready to come out the oven by the playoffs. And if it doesn't, then like, you go back to the drawing board and do it all over again. I think it is kind of interesting that in the playoffs or in the championship or bust conversation, we've kind of lost sight of the fact that like the playoffs do mean everything at the end of the day. Like they do. It is what happens. It is how like jobs are defined, how legacies are determined. Like it is ultimately the barometer that matters the most.
1,000%. And that is not to say that this outcome should result in anybody looking at members of the Milwaukee Bucks and saying like, you as a whole, your entire career, your entire season,
you guys suck. You're losers. You're lame. Get out of here.
Yeah, you are stamped as losers forever, and you don't get to take that cape off or whatever. That's no one's saying that, and no one's suggesting that it's not a healthy attitude to have just broadly toward life to say like, there's a reason that you can't win them all is a saying. It is a truism of the world, and that is a healthy thing to understand. We are playing a game, and what matters on some level is just playing the game, right? But not on this level. This is the professional level, at the highest level of the sport, at the absolute apex of the highest level of the sport in the postseason. This is when I struggle. I understand Giannis using the Michael Jordan analogy. I struggle, though, to imagine Michael Jordan after losing a playoff series saying, well, it doesn't mean that it was like a failure, and now granted, maybe using Michael Jordan as the like framework for understanding a healthy relationship to winning is a fool's errand and maybe not the right way to go about it. But it comes back to, I think there have been sort of arch sides dug in on both views of this, like God bless Giannis for saying this wonderful thing, and ardent supporters of his philosophy, saying it's so refreshing and so wonderful to have this perspective out there. And then there are other people saying like, this is insane. If anybody else said this, we would be pillorying them for it. Imagine, for example, Kyrie Irving or another, Russell Westbrook or somebody else who maybe does not have the public Q score at this point of Giannis coming out and saying like, well, it's only, it's not a failure if you lose in the first round as the 1 seed in 5 games to a team that you were projected to beat. Like that is, and both. So I don't know, both things can be true here, but I think that any sober morning after, month after, whatever evaluation of what happened here that doesn't reach the conclusion that the Bucks failed in what they were trying to do is preposterous to me. I do not understand it.
Yeah. I mean, let's take it over to Knicks Cavs because we could worship at the church of
Speaking of preposterous, and I don't really understand. Here we go, Knicks Cavs.
I mean, we could worship at the church of Jimmy Butler, but we have a whole nother series to do so. And I think we can talk a lot about, the Cavs don't have it as nearly as much at stake as we were just talking about. But like they're in an interesting position in that they did kind of back up the Brinks truck to get Donovan Mitchell. And personally, I had 2 thoughts watching these Eastern Conference games last night. Number one, as much about like player evaluation, 2 thoughts. Number one, as much as Miami won, like we'll talk about this in next week and as the series goes along because we got to get to next Cavs. But like Bam, I don't think is bringing in enough for the Heat to really justify the contract that they gave him. And number 2, Evan Mobley is very, 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 very talented, super long, super athletic, has all the tools. Evan Mobley seems to have gotten a bit anointed ahead of schedule to the point where I don't know if he is as effective as the narrative machine has built. Like if he is a weapon in progress, people are talking about him as this like fully finished artillery, and he's just not right now. And Mitchell Robinson just dominated the offensive glass. I mean, Josh Hart did as well, but you talked about it on our show. You wrote about it at Yahoo that rebounding was going to be key in this series, and it absolutely was. The Knicks were plus 18 on the glass in Game 5. Mitchell and Josh Hart combined for as many rebounds as the entire Cleveland team. I mean, like I said earlier, I don't think, I mean, this isn't like an indictment on Evan Mobley. He's super young. Like I think we need to just consider the fact that trading for Donovan wasn't just like the thing that put Cleveland in the contending, realm of the East, basically. And I think that's my conclusion here. Like, I think Mobley is not necessarily ready to be that game-changing front court piece that people, there was all this talk in the offseason. They're like, I saw him in the gym and he was hitting 3-pointers and it was crazy. And like, he's not even, I'm really intrigued by what Evan Mobley can be. I think Donovan was clearly an MVP candidate and an all-NBA talent player in the regular season, but it's challenging to see how him and Darius Garland optimize each other moving forward. I feel like someone in the league texted me last night saying, Darius Garland ain't that good. And I was like, well, he was really, really, really damn good last year, and now all of a sudden he has ceded so much ball handling opportunity to Donovan Mitchell. I'm going to round this whole rant to a close and just say, entering the postseason and at the deadline, the question for Cleveland was, how do they get a fifth guy? Their front court locked in, backcourt phenomenal, but they're just missing this like connective 3-and-D piece that just should be the final piece for this naturally built, rebuild thing. And it seems like the problems are a little bit bigger than that.
The postseason is kind of truth serum, right? It forces you to declare who you are and what you can do and what you can't do. And I think Tom Thibodeau,
or what you're comfortable doing, because there's a lot of guys who practice stuff in the gym and they do it in the regular season, and then when the lights are on the brightest, they're passing it, when they're under the rim or they're deferring a shot because there's 3 guys swinging at them and they don't want, and they can do it, but they're not feeling up for it.
100%, and that's why the swing piece for the Cavs in this whole discussion was Isaac Okoro, right? And the last couple of years, it was, they're going to leave him wide open in the corners and he can't make that shot. This year, shot over 40% from 3, was pretty, not like monster volume, but a couple of game, and was making them at a pretty high clip. Game 1 of this series, Knicks leave him alone, say, we believe that if we leave you alone and whoever else is on the wing, we're going to be able to gum up the rest of the offense. And he misses, I think, 5 of 6 shots in the first game, all 4 of his 3-pointers. The Knicks strangle the Cavs offense, win that game. He picks up a couple of fouls early in game 2, is out of the game, and all of a sudden the Cavs are now into their rotation. All right, it's a Karis LeVert. Is it Cedi Osman? Is it Danny Green, who barely, was even part of that team? I think a lot of people might have been surprised that Danny Green was on the Cavs when they were watching that playoff game.
Shout out Lamar Stevens.
Shout out Lamar Stevens. Listen, Lamar Stevens and Dean Wade maybe could have given him something, but they were not getting it elsewhere. And JB Bickerstaff clearly didn't think that they were going to give it to him. Ricky Rubio, got in for a few minutes, but the shooting wasn't there for that either. So the Knicks forced Okoro to prove he could do it in high pressure situations. He couldn't. That pushed everybody else. And Okoro, to his credit, wound up coming back and making some big contributions later in the series. But we're going to make you declare that you can do this and prove it. And if you can't, if you're not comfortable with it, if you're not able to do it consistently when you get the opportunity, it knocks a leg out from your team, and then we're going to lean on you. And the Knicks ran into that same problem 2 postseasons ago against Trae Young and the Hawks, where it's like, you are going to have to deal with our pick and roll in your drop coverage over and over again. You hang back, he's going to pop the floater. You come up, he's going to throw the lob, and you have to figure out a way to solve it. And the Knicks didn't. And the Knicks, the favored 4 seed, went down in 5 games to a 5th seed that could make them play the way they didn't want to play. And now, then it took the Knicks 2 years and a roster reshuffling and reorganizing a lot of things and bringing in different kinds of players on the wing and different kinds of players that could execute the systems differently. And they are now they are in better position to handle those kind of matchups. Whether they'll be able to handle the physicality and the shot making of Jimmy Butler, much bigger discussion. But Cleveland now finds himself in a position where they have to find those same alternate avenues, but they're with precious little resources to do it after the Mitchell trade. And that's kind of the rubber meets the road moment. Karis LeVert's going to be a free agent. Whatever cap space they've got is probably going to have to go to bring him back, if only because you can't replace him if he does go out the door, and you maybe need to save that matching salary or salary slot for any kind of moves you want to make. They cannot trade a first-round pick because of the Donovan Mitchell trade. Their first-round pick in this year's draft is going to Indiana from the Karis LeVert trade. You have maybe the mid-level exception, about $12 million, that you can get somebody for that for sure. Who are you getting on the wing market that's going to solve your problem there? I don't know if Dylan Brooks is going to be the answer to that question, considering we're seeing the exact same problem play out with him in Memphis. So then are you then just waiting another year and hoping that more internal development from Garland, from Mobley, from, insert other Okoro, insert other players there is going to solve that problem for you in-house? How confident can you feel in that? These are the questions that the postseason forces you to answer and presents to you. And I think right now the Cavs probably have to feel a little bit concerned that they don't have good enough answers for it.
Yeah, and I can tell you, this is the last thing, then we'll get into an ad break. Like at the deadline, when Cleveland was looking for upgrades on the wing, Karis LeVert was their measuring stick. It was, can we find someone better than this guy? Because we like this guy. We just traded a first-round pick for him last year, and then he got hurt, and we didn't get to have him in our, play-in push, and they didn't have him in the play-in game. He wasn't consistent on the court this year either, but they at least have him, and they have his bird rights, I believe. And that's just, the devil is sometimes just better than the devil you don't, in terms of making a critical decision when you have limited resources and assets to make your team better. So one thing to finish on this before we go to the break.
Yeah. Jared Allen in his exit interview said, and the quote was, I believe, even for me, the lights were brighter than I expected. And that, I think, is a place that the Cavs are going to have to, that's something the Cavs are going to have to sit with. Yeah. Obviously, Madison Square Garden is a different animal, all that kind of stuff. But the hope is this was the learning experience that that's in your memory banks. You've processed that. You figure out how to deal with it moving forward. But if the guys that you have in there can't respond under that sort of environment, then you've got serious questions to answer about how you're constructed moving forward.
Yeah. And the market will be different this summer than it was at the deadline in terms of who's available. Contracts are 6 months into the future by comparison, and some contracts are over that were like Karis LeVert's will be, so it won't exactly be a carbon copy of the same decisions and choices they had on the table in February. But I can at least say that I think in terms of looking to upgrade that position, that was their calculus then. And I would think that I wouldn't think anything happened where they are just distraught over Karis LeVert and he's no longer an option on the table. I would still think that for the contract value that he's expected to command, something I believe north of 15, below 20, I don't know how many better options are going to be available, and wanting to come to Cleveland. It's not a shot at Cleveland. It's just the circumstances are, that's for every team. I don't know how many players are going to be available and open and wanting to come that will be different and have a much higher ceiling than what they've already got. So it will be interesting to see how this Cavs front office, which has been very creative, how they will continue to move this thing forward as we head into the offseason and as we on No Cap Room head into an ad break. All right, welcome back to No Cap Room, and we're going to keep going with last night's games. Grizzlies, Lakers, Memphis 116, Lakers 99. The Grizzlies stave off elimination. Dan, you went deep on this game last night, so I'm just going to get out of your way and watch you cook here. What did you see? What did you learn?
ISO ball for me. 1-4 flat.
Yeah. What are you expecting happened in games 5 that will then lead to changes or things to look out for in game 6 as the series shifts back to the crypt, as they now call it?
I can't. The only bummer about that is that, there's a million bummers about that, but about it being Crypto.com arena. But I always, Russell Westbrook in that arena, Rocket from the Crypt was right there. But we, for fellow old indie rock people, but he didn't play well enough to be the Rocket from the Crypt. Although now with the Clippers, maybe he is that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that said, I think the biggest thing is just, so now we're in the point of the postseason of the first round schedule where it's every other game or every other day, right? And you have travel from Memphis back to LA for game 6. And LeBron played 45 minutes in game 4, did not have it for a lot of game 4, was, battling on the glass, cranked it up, like found those last kind of few drops of gas in the gas tank on the layups at the end of regulation and in overtime to get them over the finish line. And then he comes for game 5 and 5 of 17 from the floor, 1 of 9 from 3. There were a couple of moments of kind of bursts and explosions of him getting to the rim and getting above the rim, but there wasn't a whole lot of it. And I struggle to remember. I think the stat that I had in the piece was it's the 15th time in his postseason career that he's had 15 or fewer points in a game, which is wild. You think about just his postseason resume and how many he's played, that there have been that few over this long a period of time. But I struggle to remember that many performances where LeBron was almost like an afterthought for large portions of it. The Lakers ran pretty much everything they could through Anthony Davis because they had to. And, there was a moment where D'Angelo Russell gets a couple of shots to go. There were moments where Austin Reeves was getting downhill off of staggered screens, and that was creating good looks for them. But LeBron was a complementary piece offensively for a lot of the game. Still ends up with 15, 10, and 5 in 37 minutes. But the fact that the Lakers were making a run middle of the fourth quarter or so, they were still down 12, but or they were down double digits. But Darvin Ham took LeBron out and said, we're going to save you these last 4.5 minutes because we think we're going to need him in game 6. Maybe it's just that LeBron is playing the long game and biding his time. And he knew that he didn't really have to crank it up for game 5 because they had game 6 back at home and multiple chances to close it out. But I wonder what he's got left. I wonder, betting against LeBron is a fool's errand. We've seen that. But betting on a 38-year-old with a torn foot tendon to suddenly just be explosive 2 nights after he looked like he had nothing, 4 nights after he played 46 minutes in an overtime game, that might not be all that bright either. So and the fact that the Lakers offense, when AD's not going off, and he's kind of alternated every other game going off in this series, the Lakers offense doesn't have a whole lot of other answers. If LeBron doesn't have it in the tank, where do they go for offense? And then what does that open up for Memphis as they try to get even?
I mean, it seems like their best option outside of AD is Austin Reeves and that AD pick and roll. That's what they ran successfully in the play-in tournament. That's what carried them a lot towards the end of the regular season. But yeah, that's not exactly the firepower of Ja Morant and Desmond Bane coming downhill off of screens with someone as talented as Jaren Jackson, and shooters kind of splayed out around now that Luke Kennard is there. I said it on this show, and I kind of was starting to regret it as the Lakers went up 3-1. The Lakers truly are not that good. For a team with a 3-1 lead over the number 2 seed, I saw a lot of that stat of 95% of teams up 3-1, win the series. I was like, maybe the Lakers might not do it. It's just the longer this series goes, to your point, the war of attrition, Memphis hasn't been capable of winning a game on the road very, very easily this season. So I wonder if they're even able to do that with all the stakes. And sometimes when you fight off elimination, it's like a big emotional journey, and then to do it again, game 6 is tough.
Sure.
But if this thing goes back to Memphis for 7, then I think, we're going to get to Kings Warriors right after this. The Kings needed to stomp out the Warriors before. Game 3 was a bigger deal for the Kings to win than for the Warriors to win. And now they've lost 3 straight and they're the ones on the ropes. It could be a similar situation with the Lakers is all I'm trying to allude to.
Yeah, I think that's the flip side of the argument of where people say LeBron knows he's got a couple more chances. LeBron has also been around long enough to know that if you get the chance to take their heads off, take them off, because you don't want to let them linger around, especially when they've got 5 and 7 at home, right? So, and the fact that, a couple of tactical things just to keep an eye on, I think it's worth noting as we go into 6. Desmond Bane has basically been, Anthony Davis is the best player in this series and has been the best player in this series. Desmond Bane's been the best offensive player on the floor the last 2 games, 36 in game 4, 33 in game 5. And the Lakers are responding to it. They've started trying to trap the ball out of his hands when he gets the ball in the pick and roll. They've even started bringing a second defender over to him, just like off the catch when he's running off the ball. They're trying to keep the ball out of his hands. Memphis read that, understood it, and started changing, bringing Ja Morant up higher on the floor as an outlet passer for that, and then having Xavier Tillman or Jaren Jackson cut right through the lane as soon as that the pass got out of the trap. And it was some tic-tac-toe stuff. And Memphis was getting like a free runner downhill at the rim, and LeBron's the low man, so he's going to block some of those shots. He's going to be put up tough contests. But if the Grizzlies are able to play out of those traps effectively and get good looks at the rim, then maybe the Lakers got to hang back on instead of cranking up the heat on Desmond Bane. And if Bane's in a rhythm like he's been the last 2 games, he can put up a crooked number pretty quick. And then the other thing, you mentioned Luke Kennard. Only scoring about 7 points a game in this series, but they are the offensive spread with him on the floor. The way he is able to unlock the floor has been just gigantic. No player on the Grizzlies has a bigger on-court, off-court swing on the offensive end than Kennard in this series. You saw when the Grizzlies went small in Game 5. And they went small in a way that haven't done all season. Jaren Jackson Jr. at the 5 with 4 guards around him, Bane, Morant, Kennard, and Tyus Jones. And it created a level of space and room for Morant and Bane to operate that they just hadn't had. But then, beginning of the second half, I believe, beginning of the fourth quarter, maybe, Kennard runs into a LeBron screen, hurts his left shoulder. He's a lefty. That's his shooting arm. And goes out, doubtful to come back, checks back in. When he comes back to the bench, he has like a gigantic boulder of like an iceberg on his shoulder wrapped around it. And there's now some question as to whether he can go in game 6. That would be a huge problem for Memphis in terms of the way they structure their offense, especially because you have to figure fewer Kennard minutes or no Kennard minutes means more Dillon Brooks minutes. And as we've seen throughout the course of this series, he provides like the opposite of spacing. He provides claustrophobia. I don't know. And it is the Grizzlies can't really afford too much of that in a do or die game 6.
Yeah, Kennard is standing in the corner alone. You can feel how much more breathing room there is. And I mean, 3-point shooting has been a thing that can swing series based off of home and road splits for a long, long time now, as the rate of outside shooting has prolifically risen across the league. And what better team has illustrated that than the Golden State Warriors, who we've been kind of waiting for Klay Thompson to be Klay Thompson in this playoffs. Usually it's Game 6 Klay, right? Game 6 Klay is the flamethrower who comes out and puts the team on his back and saves a 3-1 deficit versus Oklahoma City and other things and whatever. Game 5 Klay showed up last night. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I mean, the dude went ballistic at the end of the second quarter, and then he hit absolutely insane step back corner 3 from the left side with Giannis Sabonis in his face to kind of put the nice cushion that Golden State needed. He didn't put the nail in the coffin. He didn't seal the game. I don't think that was the dagger, but that was the shot where, to me, it kind of, all right, I'm not so scared about Golden State. There's another game on the TV. I think that game was like, I think that happened right after the Bucks Heat game had ended, that Klay shot. But still had the press conferences on, and hearing Eric Spoelstra's contrast of what his vibes were like compared to Mike Budenholzer was just a sight to behold. But we talked a lot about the Bucks. I think with the Kings and the Warriors, I mean, the biggest knock on this Warriors team has been that they can't win on the road, and they've done it. 28 record 28 straight series with a road victory. That's been their MO throughout this entire championship DNA. And I mean, Sacramento is a tough friggin' place to play these days, man. And to do it, I mean, obviously De'Aaron Fox's finger is lingering over things now, but he looked pretty good, I'd say, all things considered. I don't have his shooting splits in front of me either. We're just going from things we saw.
Fox finished 9 for 25 from the floor and 3 out of 10 from 3.
Yeah, the effectiveness wasn't there that you'd seen previously, but in terms of like his willingness to attack, and it didn't change his approach to the game, let's say. So I still think that like the Kings have the firepower to make it a game and a contest, but like I picked the Warriors to win the West. Like I'm not surprised that even down in the 2-0 hole, they could rattle off 4 straight here. We've seen it before. We saw Giannis and the Bucks do it in years past. We've seen, I remember the Spurs did it after falling down 2-0 to OKC. Like that was back in like 2015 or something like that. Like it's not an unparalleled thing, but that's the thing that championship teams do. They obviously are the reigning champions, 4 in the last 8. Like I think Sacramento just ran into a buzzsaw. Wiggins is hitting pull-up jumpers, and he had this gorgeous fadeaway from the right elbow last night that just is what you're drafted to be as a number 1 pick to like one day become. And he is the last vestige of the Kevin Durant trade, as people are signing, as people are very keen on pointing out. Like the Warriors are just the Warriors. Like I think that's what this is. I think that's the expert analysis really to bring out here.
Well, I think there's also, you survive the games where Draymond is not able to make a shot because of all he brings you as a playmaker and on the defensive end. But then in the games where he does, and he comes off the bench again, goes 8 for 10 from the field. He's making the layups that he was smoking the other night. He makes a 3.
Knock it down a corner 3, yep.
All of that feels like, 2 buckets every time he gets one, right? Because you're like, oh man, it's one thing to try to deal with Steph and go and run around with him. It's another thing when Clay is going to, suddenly hit 3 threes in a row and you're like, oh my God, that the whole building's on fire. Wiggins is going to be able to put like 6 points per quarter on you on those jumpers, no matter what. But then, oh my God, now Draymond is doing it, or now you're getting like 8 or 10 points off the bench from Gary Payton II. Like those feel like the dam it feels like the dam's bursting. Yeah. And I think it is a credit to Sacramento that even as all that's happening, they are right there. That's a 1-2 possession game down to the final seconds, basically. It's not like the Warriors hit him with an uppercut and they just fell down. They have answered every call in this series. Now they find themselves in a position, the unenviable position, though, of having to stave off elimination with Steph at home. That is not any place you want to be. If whether you assign any mystique or not to Game 6 Clay, the Warriors have been just elite at home all season, and it's going to take something special for the Kings to be able to extend this series and get it back to Golden One Center. And as always on this podcast, we stand for Kevon Looney. He's just been legend, fantastic. Legend. He's been fantastic. He's what every team Jake Fisher, wants. Who told you before the series they were going to live with Kevon Looney playing Sabonis straight up, and they're going to say you're going to have to deal with the physicality, you're going to have to finish over the top, and we think it's going to work out for us. Who told you that? You did. That's right. It's the one thing I was right about this entire playoff, so I'm going to say it again and again. No, you're right about the offensive rebounding with Cleveland too, man. I gave you your flowers there. The one, I still picked Cavs in 7, so what the hell do I know? I picked the Knicks. I know you did. You were right about that. The one thing we know for sure about the Clippers, now that they've lost 4-1 to Phoenix, is that something's going to happen. They're not just going to sit on their hands and run this thing back. There's got to be some type of adjustment made. There's plenty of rumblings in the ether about, do you split Kawhi and Paul George with their contract extensions coming up and a $300 million payroll that's never amounted to anything outside of a Western Conference appearance? There's been, which in fairness is not nothing, considering that franchise had never been past the second round before. Like you got to at least give them that. You have to. There's been plenty of conversation about the futures of both Tyronn Lue and the front office. There's been, in the first rumbling I heard, we talked about it kind of briefly here on one of our first shows, and I saw some Clippers fans freaked out at me that I was saying that Tyronn Lue might make his own decision and decide he doesn't want to do something anymore. Like that's been kind of floating in the echo chamber since December. I don't know if he will. He told reporters after the loss that he plans on coming back. There's a long off season to be put to play, so we'll see how that all unfolds. I mean, I definitely think there was some contrast in opinion, let's say, between at least Ty Lue and the front office of what they were looking for at the deadline in terms of size, where Ty wanted more of like a switchable. I'm trying to think of the type of player that would make sense, but not Mason Plumlee, like a real small ball type of guy, like
what Robert Covington was to the Houston Rockets 5 years ago. Like that type of small ball piece that would have been a nice tool in his toolkit whenever he felt Ivica Zubac couldn't play in that matchup. That didn't come. That's like one. I know there's been a ton of rumors swirling about like there just being dissent between management and the coaching staff. I don't know what the full context is. I need to make more calls on that, but that's like one sticking point that I do know of and was coming up at the deadline. Plus, like Russ has been fantastic, but they traded for Bones Highland. There's just like decisions to be made, like any team that loses in the first round that had championship expectations, like we talked about with Milwaukee. So I say all that to say, Dan Devine, any thoughts, feelings, questions that you have to bring to our listeners here about the other LA team?
Yeah, the other LA team. I'm sure that the Clippers are going to love hearing that, but it's inarguable. There's no way to talk around it. I think we've now spent 4 years waiting for the realized version of this team, and I don't think you need to assign any sort of moral failing to it for not coming to fruition. And there have been people, very popular and loud and well-paid people, that have talked about whether or not people should retire or be traded or be forced out it's not like I think Kawhi Leonard doesn't like playing basketball. I think he really likes it. He probably has I'm sure he has a much better sense of what is right for his body than anybody else. I just don't know how you build on that level of uncertainty, how you continually construct rosters that have to operate one way when you have everybody, and then another way when you have everybody minus one, and then another way when you have everybody minus two. I don't know how you can do that sustainably over a long period of time without, I guess, being like, I don't know, like a Manchester City level of Galactico and saying, we're just going to run like $600 million payrolls to have as many guys as we can.
Which Steve Ballmer could do. Everyone pushes back on any type of, they don't push back, but that's the obvious counterpoint to lob during any conversation that I've had with an NBA person about the Clippers. It's just, well, Steve Ballmer could just decide, screw it, I'm cutting the check.
And if he does, like, listen, I mean, we're here in New York. Steve Cohen became like a folk hero to Mets fans for being that kind of owner and a villain to all the other owners. I imagine Steve Ballmer is kind of already that guy. That's maybe why you're seeing, along him and Joe Lacob, why you're seeing some of the more punitive things that are in the new collective bargaining agreement about the second luxury tax apron level and all the different restrictions that are going to come for that free spending team.
Super important context to mention here.
And at a certain point, even the willingness to pay is not going to afford you all the opportunities you want, because you're going to be limited in terms of other aspects, other things you can use to build your team up. All that to say, though, like, they had to make the deal that they made. Kawhi Leonard coming off a championship, the opportunity to land Paul George after he'd been an MVP finalist, I think the year before that, to in their prime, like, big wing creators who are all NBA defenders. The positional, the archetype of what won in the NBA at that point, to get two of them on your roster when you haven't been past the second round ever, and when you are flailing and looking for some pivot off of the end of the Doc, CP3, Blake, DeAndre era, they had to do what they did.
Yep.
It hasn't worked out. There's no, I don't, and that's not an indictment of Kawhi Leonard. It's not an indictment of Paul George or of Tyronn Lue or of anybody else that was part of that decision-making process. But I don't know how you can look at it at this stage and not say, we maybe need something more stable to build around. But within that context, we're kind of pot committed to what this team is for at least the next year, with both of those guys on the books for 40 plus next year, and then their player options for the year after that. It seems more likely that they're going, and that is especially with the more punitive luxury tax stuff coming in. I believe it's going to be phased in over the first 2 years. Yep. So maybe it's balls to the wall this next year, and
Arena
more
24-25 coming up too.
That's it. At that point, the Intuit Dome, they're working all of that out. More screaming about toilets. They're going to have to put a product worth paying for on the floor there. And so maybe it's, we damn the torpedoes one more time. use whatever assets and roster building machinations we have available to us to get something else next year and give it one more run and see where we are come next summer. But I think to this point, you have to, like, I don't know how you can make a long-term plan when it seems like the short-term plan changes every other night, seemingly, without maybe the coach always knowing that it's going to change or the other executives always knowing that it's going to change based on health and availability.
Yeah. And to the CBA part of it, I was speaking to a strategist from another team yesterday and asking, teach me what are the limitations specifically that these Clippers right now are going to have to face with this new CBA coming into the fold. We're recording this on Thursday. The teams got the new CBA on Monday. So they don't know yet. They're still kind of looking at it and figuring, they know the information's there. They finally have it. For a long time, it was like, oh, we need the term sheet, whatever. It's been a month since we need the term sheet, conversation. Term sheet's out. The CBA is being written as we speak, but it's still going to take some time for teams to understand the new rules of the game that they're playing, and then even more time to figure out what strategy to exact within them. And this one strategist I was talking to was saying that there could be a massive advantage this summer, and we're not even going to know because, you're not going to know in the moment what rules have certain repercussions and what moves, impact these things down the line. But the teams that end up figuring out what becomes the right strategy this summer are going to end up taking massive leaps forward in this rat race of roster construction. And the Clippers, no matter what, they have their hands tied and have the hardest hand to navigate when it comes to operating under these new rules because of how expensive and loaded their roster is. So that'll be a very particular song and dance that they need to choreograph here. And I am very, very curious to see how it all unfolds. That's all we got today, folks. Celtics Hawks Game 6. Enjoy that one tonight, folks. Yeah, as Dan shivers because Trey is so icy. Yeah, that'll be an interesting one, especially with DeJounte Murray coming back. We'll probably talk about that and the ramifications, all that jazz next week. For now, that has been Dan Devine. I am Jake Fischer. Special thanks to our producer, John Gennaro, and all the hardworking people behind the scenes. Please follow us on Twitter. Dan tweets a lot more than I do, and he's very, very, very insightful. At Your Man Devine. I am at Jake L. Fischer. If you've made it this far, please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to and leave us a 5-star review. Vince Goodwill will be back on Monday with another Good Word with Goodwill. We appreciate it. We appreciate you. And we'd appreciate it if you came back next week for another episode of No Cap Room on the Ball Don't Lie network from Yahoo Sports.